Thank you, Brian, and thank you to the Morgans team for inviting us today. And thank you everyone in the room for coming along to listen to us. So we'll go through our presentation, and I'll just talk a little bit and on our natural hydrogen project in South Australia. So at the end of 2020, Luke presented to me and came to me with a project opportunity and said, Neil, we have to do natural hydrogen. And probably like the rest of you in the room now, I went, well, I understand hydrogen, but what's natural hydrogen? And I probably didn't really understand hydrogen a lot to that extent. And he explained it, and he'll probably go through more of it lately after me. But where it came from is we did our own research, and he went through the world and looking at some projects, and we accidentally landed on this project in South Australia where there was historical discoveries and occurrences of up to 90% pure hydrogen that flowed out of the ground on a conventional oil and gas well in the 20s and 30s. There's a couple of them. And they failed because they were looking for oil and gas. And he said, well, let's do this. And I did some more research together, and, we found that Mali in Africa, approximately 20 odd years ago, had drilled for a water bore and accidentally discovered natural hydrogen flowing out of the surface. And Mali to date has drilled over 20 wells, and they're powering the town on natural hydrogen. So, and as time moved along, there was movement and momentum. And you'll see that there is currently a world political and environmental push to decarbonisation. And hydrogen is going to be a very big player in this decarbonisation. As I spoke to people this morning, it's energy. And the world's not going to pick one or two or three different energy sources. There might be 5 energy sources moving forward, and then hydrogen will be a big component of that. So we want to be part of that. And you look at things, and as we were progressing, the world was moving. You saw COP26. And part of the reason is, I'm not sure if you're aware, but when hydrogen is burnt as an energy source, the only emission that is produced is water or mist or steam. It's a very clean energy source. So then you think, okay, the world needs energy. The world needs reliable energy and preferably clean energy. And this ticks our boxes and ticks the world's boxes for that. So when we were going through it, Luke said the area in green there, that was the first area we applied for. And that's a granted tenement clear of native title and has the historical discoveries of hydrogen up to 90% on both the Yorke Peninsula and Kangaroo Island. And I said, let's get more area. Find every prospective area. And we went about that, and Luke found, and we've applied for the other areas you see there in salmon and grey. So we hold 74,000 square kilometres of exploration acreage of prospective natural hydrogen resources areas in South Australia. The importance of that, as I speak to Rob Douglas and the Morgans team, is that is scale. That is scale. And I have worked for the pioneers of the CSG world in Queensland. And what you need is scale. And this is not different to CSG or the shale revolution and boom. This could be exactly the same or bigger in this new decades coming. The area in green has an independent prospective resource report of 1.3 billion kilograms based on existing historical data. That's a 50% recoverable rate. We wish to go out there later this year and drill with a few steps along the way. So we wish to drill the end of third quarter, fourth quarter this year to get commercial grades of hydrogen to the surface. And that is using some of the best experts in the world, including Schlumberger, CSIRO. And this is existing normal gas techniques with a modern equipment and testing equipment for hydrogen specifically. We do not need to frack, and although hydrogen's in kilograms, you do not mine it. It's a gas. So no fracking, no mining. We're not using water. And I'll go through the other forms of hydrogen that you've heard. There's a rainbow of colours, and that will give you some more context of where we are with. So we've got scale, we've got a proven prospective resource, and we're planning to do activities. We're flying next week, from this weekend, airborne gravity magnetics, which will help prove the existing source rocks of how hydrogen's produced and further drill-ready targets of areas. CSIRO are going out mid-April to do soil sampling to also prove up future drill-ready targets of where hydrogen is, and Luke will go into more of that in detail. So I'll go through some of the uses, but that's our area there in the background. So the investment, and I might just go back one stage actually, while you got the map there. The investment in hydrogen worldwide is enormous. It is enormous for those reasons for decarbonisation. South Australian government is leading the charge in Australia for renewable projects and also for hydrogen. That includes all forms of hydrogen. So they changed the legislation before we applied for the permits to allow for natural hydrogen to be under their Gas Act. And they also changed the legislation to allow up to 10% of the total carrying capacity of the existing gas pipelines to carry hydrogen. So we can flow hydrogen there. But further to that, they've committed to, under their Hydrogen Action Plan, to build a hydrogen hub at Port Pirie, which I'm not sure if the clicker works. No, I turned it off. Port Pirie is up into the corner of the left of the screen. And Port Pirie is where they're going to have a hydrogen hub, which includes export facilities and other facilities. And then around the corner to the left is a town called Whyalla, big steelworks. The government had pledged to build a 600 million hydrogen energy power plant there. They're going to need hydrogen. And they're optimistic, but they're aiming to have this almost commissioned and ready by the end of 2025, which is not that far away. So our project is close to infrastructure. It's close to existing networks, local offtakes, but more importantly, we believe that, and our independent experts believe that if we can flow commercial hydrogen to what we're expecting, the number of the hydrogen will go closer to 9 to 10 billion kilograms on that one granted tenement. And to put that into perspective, that is more than enough for to commission an export boat. So in the LNG world, that would commission your own transportation boat, which leads me to the other investments in the world. And that is a huge investment moving forward. So you can see the numbers there, but to give you some context of what's actually happening on the ground is that Japan has been working and developing hydrogen for over 20 years now. And they have got to the stage where they have progressed, and this time last year, shipped liquefied hydrogen from Victoria to Tokyo. They are well progressed to go to a hydrogen economy as part of their energy mix. Same with Korea. Europe are already transitioning and have allowed hydrogen to be flowed through the existing gas pipelines. They're repurposing the existing gas generator systems to take hydrogen. They're already building hydrogen refueling stations. Australia is moving that way as well, but Europe and Asia, which are going to be two key export markets apart from Australia, are heading down that pathway already. And the low-hanging fruit is, we'll come to next, is energy. But before I go there, I just want to give you some context of our commercial advantage. You'll see up there, there is what we call, you've heard of green, there's blue, there's black and brown. So black, brown, grey is what they would say is a fossil fuel, either coal or gas, which is used to manufacture hydrogen. And that can be splitting the water to make hydrogen. Green is the most common one you've heard and Twiggy talk about. That involves either using wind or solar panels to provide the electricity and the energy to go into a hydrolysis machine to split the water. So that involves huge tracts of land where you will put solar panels across, manufacturing and building the hydrolysis facilities at enormous cost, and using water, which is a valuable resource in Australia. I think some of those projects are already going to receive a little bit of further investigation because of the water source, especially in Tasmania. But we're well placed. The cleanest and the smallest footprint of all the hydrogen. It's a small well. Our area is not big. We don't have to mine the materials to make the solar panels or the wind farms. This is a very low cost, small footprint hydrogen. And there is talk in Europe about grading hydrogen, like the thermal coal market, how you have Newcastle coal as the thermal coal benchmark. They're talking about grading hydrogen to have it at a purity level. So the brown coal might be a higher price or not as clean. Sorry, a lower price, but not as clean. But the investment's huge. Japan are wanting to spend $2.8 billion on doing a brown coal hydrogen project in Victoria, as an example. So as long as the world moves towards hydrogen, we're well placed. But the key factor I want to show you is the cost. Green hydrogen before transportation is approximately $6 a kilogram. Gold hydrogen or natural hydrogen is $1 a kilogram before transportation, based on what Marley has been doing and what other scientific journals believe that natural hydrogen can flow out of existing reservoirs. So that's a huge cost advantage for us. So scale and low cost producer. And this is just some areas here of, it's ESG. Viva Energy Australia are committing in Australia alone to transporting hydrogen to business, as they transport fuel, diesel and other gases. They'll repurpose their fuel stations for that purpose. You'll see the energy, and that's one of our key requirements Luke will mention. As soon as we flow hydrogen from the surface, we can put it into a fuel cell and provide electricity. And then just the car, just to give you some context, Hyundai and Toyota are well advanced on their hydrogen fuel car, which is with an electric engine. And BMW and other companies are heading down that path really well. And some of the questions that you'll get is, well, what's the efficiency of hydrogen? How much does it cost? And I think we've all got a car. We've all got an idea of what it costs at the Bowser. The hydrogen, the Toyota and the Hyundai car, which you can sort of Google, it's updating all the time. It's 5 to 6 kilograms of hydrogen to fill a tank at approximately $15 Australian at the moment. And I know there's not many places, but that's the cost of $15 Australian. They're getting up to 1,000 kilometres out of that tank, driving probably in very good straight line conditions, but the average conditions they're getting is 600 kilometres a tank. So you do your numbers of, 5 or 6 times 15, it's $90 and you're getting 600 kilometres. It's not a cost impediment to new vehicles as opposed to what we're paying the fuel Bowser for other products. So I think, and then just for those interested, we are talking to other parties. We've had global interest from the world major oil and gas companies watching us, wanting to be part of this. We've had a lot of local interest for MOUs and the space of Whyalla. And green steel is coming. So parties will have to go to green steel. As an example, to make steel at the moment using coking coal, the balance point or the tipping point is approximately 180 kilograms a tonne for coking coal. So with coking coal above that price or closer to $300, it makes hydrogen or other alternative energy sources very, very compatible. So that's where we got to, and that's what we were progressing to. And as I said, we're flying the airborne, we're doing the soils, and we're drilling load this year. And I'll pass to Luke to do that. And to give you the context of our story, we listed, to sum up my area, we listed, and while I was going through all these things and working on all these things, I ran into Rob Douglas and the Morgans team up at Noosa conference 2 years ago. And Rob said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, we're trying to do this, Rob." And he looked at me. And then about 2 hours later, I was sitting with Brian and Roger Leaning and Rob and the team with going through this and getting Luke on the line. So I'd like to thank Morgans for getting us through its very successful IPO and getting us a stage to progress this project. I'll pass over to Luke.
So my name's Luke Titus. I'm a geologist by background, and I'd also like to thank Morgans for their effort with helping us and inviting us to breakfast this morning. It was good. The gold hydrogen. Now, the interesting thing, one of the things I just wanted to elaborate on what Neil talked about is most of the time in our industry, in the resource sector, everything is found by accident, right? It's not found by having the right data at the right time. Things are found by accident when people are looking for things. And in this particular project, I was working in South America and ran across a paper. It talked about these fairy circles in the Brazilian jungle, and there was these depressions that were in the middle of the canopy where no vegetation would grow. And scientists went out there and started looking at the soils. They started looking at the gas that was coming out of the ground, and they realized that it was predominantly hydrogen. Anyway, in and amongst this paper that I got somehow stuck into while looking at gold projects, I found a small map in the back that showed a number of points around the world. And in particular, it showed some things in Australia, up in the Canning Basin, up in the Amadeus Basin, down in Tasmania, down in South Australia, a little bit in New South Wales. And went into the bibliography like you do and found a paper by a fellow named Keith Ward, who in the 1930s had gone out to these wells that the newspaper had been reporting on, that the syndicates that were drilling these wells were looking for oil, and that they had these odd gases coming to the surface that were displacing the pits, and in some cases were actually starting on fire. But it wasn't hydrocarbons. So Keith had collected a number of gas samples from the drill site and taken them to a lab, and lo and behold, it was anywhere from 80 to 90% hydrogen. So as you do with these kinds of accidental discoveries, you think, okay, can you deploy modern technique on a project like this? Can I go get a drilling rig and step through a process of identifying this gas in the ground and where it's coming out of the ground? Can I test the gas? Can you figure out how big the tank might be in the ground and how it works? And then ultimately, how would you probably develop something like this and take it to market? So it's not too dissimilar to the same kind of workflows that you see in hydrocarbon. It's just a gas in the ground, but it's not a gas that anybody has really worked with in the last 100 years or so. Because remember, the first engine that was ever built ran on hydrogen, and that was in the 1800s. So we applied for 100% working interest on this. We still retain 100% working interest on it. But around a gas like this, you also need to qualify it, right? Because remember, you got the big end of town that's full of propeller heads that are legends within their own minds, okay? And you want to be able to substantiate what you're doing from an arm's length distance with an independent assessor. So I went and got with Tioff Rodriguez, who's the former chief reservoir engineer at Santos. He was there for 40 years. And a guy named Greg Horton, who also helps advise Chapter 5 listing rules, everything that everybody operates under the resource sector around discoveries and reporting, and a geologist that works in South Australia at the state named Paul Strong. And I sat down with them and went through the information and said, I believe that we should be able to put together a prospective resource on something like this around the SPE and PRMS guidelines, okay? Something that substantiates what we do, but that also tells us and gives us the knowledge to be able to take a project forward and what we need to be doing around uncertainties on a project like this, so we can explain to people what a 1.3 billion kilogram resource is. So 1.3 billion kilograms in a nutshell is around 700 BCF of gas. Okay, so it's a little bit less than a T. The high side number on it is right around 5 TCF. So you're right at that LNG kind of stage. That's an unrisked number. So everything that comes with this, you still have your P sub G, which is your geologic uncertainty, and your development and your commercial. So you still have to run the gauntlet of everything that you need to do to try to mature the title on a project like this as well. Now, I'll jump to the gas because I'm probably boring you with too many technical things here. But so the interesting thing about the gas that came out of the ground, and remember, this went through a lab analysis. So they found hydrogen in it, predominantly hydrogen. They found 1%, 2% methane, and they found a nitrogen with it as well. And you'll notice that with the depths on this particular chart, that the hydrogen content is increasing with depth. So as they drilled deeper and deeper, the purity started to clean up more. It's relatively interesting. So the thing you do is you go, okay, well, what's generating this gas, right? What are those parameters around what would be generating a gas like this? Because in the petroleum sector, you got source rocks that generate gas. Over here, you're not in a petroleum system. You're outside of a petroleum system, which is an important ingredient here, because you don't want a petroleum system there because it will steal hydrogen into its system. So with this particular gas, it's likely being generated in the basement. So what other gases are usually generated in the basement? Well, you can look at the Amadeus where they drill the basement, for example, okay? Nitrogen, hydrogen, helium, a little bit of CO2, and abiotic methane comes out of the basement up there. Then they put that in a pipeline and they sent it to Darwin. So that's largely the gas contents that we're seeing here as well. So that's that independent assessment there. You can see the leads and the prospects. Okay, so we'll be drilling out the prospects. The prospects have largely been deployed. So that's twinning existing wells. Okay, gas came out of that well. Can we go in there with a chromatograph that reads hydrogen, nitrogen, C1 through C6 through C8? And can you deploy that piece of equipment on a drilling rig with a nice light mud, not drilling for kicks necessarily, but let the hole talk to us while we're drilling. And if you can get gas shows on that log, can you deploy a DST on it? Can you take an MDT on that? Can you get a rate out of that well? Run your proper logs on that kind of well. And if you can get those kinds of things out of it, can you take it to a discovery? How do you tick those boxes on a discovery on the Chapter 5 listing rules then? You need a rate, you need a pressure, you need some gas samples, okay? We can do all of these things. This is more geology. Sorry, guys. I was at a talk yesterday. This was driving the reservoir engineers nuts. Critical success parameters, all right? What makes this thing tick? Source rocks, okay? Basement rocks. What we have here is a really good example of this when I first started looking at this was mid-continental rifts where you've got, or margins where plates are diverging underneath the ocean. Massive amounts of hydrogen coming out of the ground right there because you've got iron-rich rocks reacting with ocean water, and it generates hydrogen. That's what you see in National Geographic with all those little worms and things living there. They're living off the hydrogen. This occurs onshore. And the funny thing is that if every hole that had ever been drilled in our industry, in the petroleum sector, had run a chromatograph that looked for hydrogen and all these other gases that nobody was interested in, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. When you look at the maps that show the hydrogen distribution around the world, a vast majority of those are in places like the former Soviet Union, for example, because those guys, they ran chromatographs that looked for all their gas. So they've got hydrogen occurrences all over the place up in their area. But then when you go to places like the States, they figured out long ago, that's just rat hole down in the basement. That's what you run your tools in and you drop all sorts of junk down into. We don't need to log that. We don't need to sniff for gas in that. We're looking for hydrocarbons. So source rock key ingredient. What we have here is hydrolysis and radiolysis. We're sitting in the Olympic Dam corridor, massive IOGC uranium deposit. Incredibly iron rich, radioactive. Hydrolysis occurs when you got big bodies of water around it, like the ocean or the Stewart Strait, the Navigator Strait, the Spencer Gulf, sitting around rocks that are like this, pumping in and out of it in the subsurface. In addition to that, you've got radiolysis occurring because you have natural bombardment from uranium and vanadium and potassium that's in this rock? Could that be the mysterious black unicorn, or purple unicorn as some people call it, that's generating this hydrogen? Very, very possible. Very, very possible there. Okay. So now you've generated this hydrogen. These guys were drilling along in a stratigraphic section above that and punched the number of reservoirs that all of a sudden were making hydrogen. Actually, one of the guys on Kangaroo Island, in the newspaper article that I found, he was actually leaning over the well and actually lit it on fire, and the thing burned for a couple of days. But it didn't burn like hydrocarbons. It burned like this odd, weird color that they reported in the archive. And so we've got a seal that's associated with these reservoirs probably. Okay, so if you look at the type of background on the geology on this, these are carbonate packages. They're Sabaka environments. A Sabaka environment is a place where you've got carbonates, salts, gypsums, all of these layers that are in this rock that are likely helping seal this up. And in these reservoirs, they're highly fractured. We're sitting in a big extension zone. We're not under compression. It's open, it's relaxed. So you've got these fracture sets that are open within the reservoir as well. And I show you heaps of core that show all sorts of fractures and awesome permeability and porosity, even in the basement rock itself. So we're not talking about, we're finding gas up in the subsurface, in the stratigraphy, but we're also seeing gas down in the basement as well from these old wells. So what do? You take a bore and you put those two things together and you punch the whole section out, give yourself a chance to take a peek. Some of the brainiacs working on the project. So Excalibur, like I said, the magnetic gravity survey. So this is a combination of hard rock and petroleum, so to speak. So you've got hard rock that's generating gas, and it's moving up into a section that's where you can penetrate it with modern technique, looking with modern tools to be able to find the gas. Okay, so with a survey like this, the real important things is that you can run detailed definition flights on this. This is 500 meter spacing at about 80 to 150 meters off the ground. You can differentiate out the different types of source rock that are going to be in this area. You've got Hiltebla Suite, which is associated with the IOGC, the Wallaroo Group, ancient rocks like this. You can break these out into their different components. Each one of them has a different type of iron content and a different type of radioactivity that's associated with it. Geologic domains. I know that Ramsey bore penetrated into the Hiltebla Suite, so it's already sitting in a nice little sweet spot probably. The right type of rock, but what is all that other rock that's around it? How is the structure associated with it? And then take that as a foundation and be able to deploy future seismic programs on it. Generate will inventory. Where are you going next? All of that normal routine that you do as you work through standalone appraisals to appraisal pilots to field development plans. Total seismic. Obviously seismic, done a bunch of reprocessing in there. Look, you're dealing with some historic data. The data's pretty good. Some parts of it aren't so good, but we've been using that to generate will inventory of where we're going to go next because you need an exploration route. Big Blue, right? Largely a services agreements with these guys. These guys have tools, they have the software, and they've got the expertise. And then of course CSIRO. So CSIRO, we've got some neat little projects with. What we're going to do there is gas soil surveys. So we can go around and we can check areas that have different basement types of rock on them. We've also got features that potentially could be vents that are coming out of the ground. So we'll test those as well. And you're looking at parts per million, billion parts per million. But what you're doing is you're going to start to stack all this data together, right? You're not relying on one source of data. You're relying on about 10 or 20 sources of data to stack things together that are going to drive you in the right direction. The other thing that's pretty cool that we're doing with them is we've gone back into the historical core, and I've got a bunch of rock that we took fractures out of. And what we're looking for is fluid inclusions in those rocks. Fluid inclusions are microscopic bubbles that have gas and fluids trapped in those. We've sampled those. We put them in a lab. You can crush that and you can actually get the gas out of it. So we can figure out from all those different source rocks and all the overlying different stratigraphy, we can go in there and try to sample for gas that might be trapped in those fractures. Okay. And that again is a proxy for where things might be sweeter or might be lower. And then you combine that back into your models and do all your geo again and try to make reservoir engineers happy, which is a hard thing to do. Now, with the drilling, this is really, I'm super excited about this drilling. I think that we've got a number of things that are behind this, including corporate objectives. What are you trying to do with a well like this? Okay. So again, it's mud logs. Okay. Running the right equipment, getting your gas shows, ticking that box there. Then can you go to a discovery? Can you tick the box on the discovery? So we put together these great big decision trees. This is how this is going to go over here and it's going to cost that much. This is how it might go down here and it's going to cost that much. But what you're trying to do is you're making sure that you're stepping through the drilling program correctly in a well like this. Okay. You don't want to go in there and just start hot dogging things in the ground. We're not at a production stage. We're not at a development stage. These are very much data-driven wells. So if you want to get the propeller heads at the big end of town happy, you slide data across the table that says, I've ticked the boxes on all of these things. They can't argue with you. So that's the purpose of that work program. And by having auditors and independents sitting behind us as well, ensuring that all of that information is being done correctly and we're setting ourselves up for the best success we can, then I'm pretty confident when we get in there that we'll know what to do and we'll know how to deploy the right tools. And we'll also understand how we're going to cost this thing out as we're going along. Okay, so I kind of went through those milestones. We're tracking the schedule really good. Airborne survey starts on Monday, most likely. We're doing some recon work right now in the air, just for safety and health insurance, things like that. And then the gas soil survey will start around April with CSIRO in the field. We've got about 100 locations there that we're going to do in that first recon activity there. And then we're working on getting all of our approvals and everything for drilling slated for September. So a little bit of the downstream. So one of the cool things that happened in Mali is that well's 100 meters. It makes 50 MCF a day or about 125 kilograms. Okay. That gas comes to the surface to a wellhead. It goes to a LPG tank that they've sat there, like what you see behind a restaurant. And then they've run into a fuel cell and it powers the town. It makes electricity for their schools, for them to turn on lights, just basic things like that. Okay. Small scale. And we're in the process of talking to a number of companies around a similar application like that, where we can turn on a light bulb. We can even get somebody to put the light bulb over their head, maybe a reservoir engineer. That's a good idea. We can get him to put a light bulb over his head. And then, of course, you got big ticket things, okay? So what we're doing here is we've run a number of simulations. So we can take our existing data and we can run out a field development plan and we can make 60,000 tons for 20 years and we can run a sustained rate at this. So you can take a gas sales agreement from the steel guys, or you can get involved in the $600 million, 200 megawatt electrolysis unit that's being built up in Port Pierre and near Whyalla and get involved in that, including being able to store their gas in the ground because we've got the gas storage licenses on our property as well. So number of avenues there that we're looking at. You can even spike gas into existing pipelines in South Australia. Okay. There's some smart people. There's some more geology stuff. Anyway, I'm getting kicked out, guys. Sorry.